On a remote ranch, a farmer with elite dogs prepares for a decisive battle against a ruthless cartel. Loyal dogs become his invincible force, guarding every building and every life on the ranch. The ruthless cartel tries to seize the territory by launching lightning-fast, bloody attacks. The farmer, a former Special Forces commander, uses tactical maneuvers and his loyal dogs to repel the enemy. The farmer's young daughter, brave and determined, finds herself at the center of the events, a symbol of hope and the future. Family bonds and unyielding determination become the defender's most powerful weapon. Every victory is a hard-earned step toward liberating the land from the grip of a brutal syndicate. This epic tale of struggle shows how family strength and loyalty can overcome any obstacle. Stay tuned if you want to know how this story ends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Many more exciting stories lie ahead. In the fading light of a bruised twilight, the rugged expanse of the northern frontier revealed a land scarred by both nature's wrath and the relentless ambition of man. Gideon Mercer, a man whose past was etched in the clandestine operations of an elite military unit, now found solace in the quiet isolation of his sprawling homestead. The estate, nestled amid rocky outcroppings and windswept plains, bore silent witness to years of solitary vigilance and careful cultivation, a life dedicated not only to tending the soil but also to mastering the art of protection. Gideon, with eyes that had once seen too much and hands calloused by both combat and the rigors of ranch work, had built a sanctuary that was as much a fortress as it was a refuge. His every gesture, whether tending to the fields or calmly directing the movements of his loyal canine companions, spoke of a man who had learned that survival was not merely a matter of chance, but the result of relentless preparation and unwavering determination. The estate was home to a motley band of trusted dogs, each bred and trained for the purposes of guarding and hunting, a living reminder of Gideon's past life. Their silent obedience and intense alertness were a testament to the discipline that had once defined an entire military unit, now repurposed into the quiet rhythm of pastoral life. Among them, the lead dog, a towering creature with an amber gaze, paced the perimeter with an air of vigilant serenity, ensuring that nothing disturbed the delicate balance of peace that had so long eluded this rugged corner of the world. Despite the relative tranquility of his new existence, a persistent undercurrent of unease lay hidden beneath the surface. Rumors of an emerging threat had begun to ripple through the nearby settlements, a shadowy collective known only as the Sable Syndicate. This nefarious organization, cloaked in secrecy and marked by a ruthless ambition, had carved out its territory through a combination of extortion, violence, and intimidation. Their activities, though initially confined to the far reaches of the border towns, were gradually encroaching upon the quiet lands where Gideon had dared to plant the seeds of a peaceful future. At the heart of this growing menace was a singular, unyielding determination to seize control of every corner of the region, regardless of the cost in human lives or shattered dreams. The syndicate's presence was as insidious as it was inevitable, creeping closer with every passing day like a dark tide that threatened to engulf the fragile world of the frontier. It was whispered in hushed tones among the local folk that the syndicate had set its sights on Mercer's homestead, not for the bounty of its land or the wealth of its livestock, but for the quiet defiance embodied by the man who had once commanded the forces of order in chaos. Gideon's personal history with confrontation was not something he took lightly. The memories of past battles, the echoes of distant gunfire, and the lingering scent of burnt oil and adrenaline were ever-present companions in his mind. However, the thought of facing such an enemy on his own terms stirred a mixture of resolve and solemn resignation. The notion of surrendering to forces that sought to claim not only his property but also the fragile hope that his daughter represented was something he could never entertain. Even as he meticulously reinforced the boundaries of his estate and ensured that every possible point of entry was secured, a gnawing worry persisted in his thoughts, an emotion that was both deeply human and profoundly unyielding. Within the sanctuary of the homestead, Gideon's daughter, Marisol, moved with a quiet grace that belied the turbulent world beyond their fields. At the tender age of 19, she had inherited both her father's striking determination and a certain wistfulness, a yearning for the innocence that had long since been eroded by the harsh realities of their existence. Her days were a blend of studies and the simple pleasures of life on the ranch, a life that had been meticulously constructed as a haven from the chaos of the outer world. Yet, as the shadows lengthened and the threat of the syndicate loomed ever closer, even the secure walls of the homestead could not completely insulate her from the creeping anxiety that whispered of danger. The serenity of a crisp autumn evening was shattered by a foreboding sense that change was imminent. It began with the distant rumble of engines and the subtle scent of diesel that hinted at the arrival of uninvited guests. Gideon, ever alert, sensed that the calm he had fought so hard to secure was on the verge of being violently disturbed. As twilight deepened into a shroud of uncertain darkness, the first of the syndicate's emissaries made their appearance along the winding road that led to the homestead. They moved with an unhurried deliberation, their silhouettes blurred against the last vestiges of a dying sun, yet every step they took was laden with an ominous promise of retribution. Without a word, Gideon's mind began to catalogue the necessary measures for defense. The landscape, once a canvas of possibility, was suddenly transformed into a chessboard on which every movement, every hidden nook and cranny, held the potential for ambush. He navigated the corridors of his memories, recollections of covert operations and tactical maneuvers, melding them with the stark realities of the present. It was in these moments of internal reckoning that he understood the true nature of the threat. It was not a mere band of marauders, but a well-organized force that blended brute violence with a cunning intelligence that could dismantle any semblance of order. The homestead structures, built with a blend of modern pragmatism and rustic durability, became instruments of resistance. Every beam, every plank, and every carefully positioned watchtower was a silent declaration that this land would not be surrendered without a fierce struggle. Even the long-forgotten relics of past skirmishes, the hidden caches of weaponry and the meticulously drawn maps of the surrounding terrain, were revived as symbols of defiance against an encroaching darkness. In the quiet of the approaching night, Gideon's preparations took on an almost ritualistic quality, as if the very act of fortifying his home was a prayer against the chaos that threatened to overrun it. Amid these tangible preparations, an intangible yet potent feeling of foreboding permeated the air. It was a sense that every moment was borrowed, that the calm before the storm was nothing more than a deceptive pause in an otherwise relentless march toward inevitable conflict. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Gideon's shoulders as he contemplated the lives that depended on his unyielding resolve. The balance between protecting what was dear and standing against the forces of anarchy was a precarious one, and every decision carried the burden of potential consequences that could ripple far beyond the confines of his own domain. In the growing gloom of the twilight, as the first stars timidly emerged to punctuate the sky, the homestead seemed to breathe a sigh of both hope and trepidation. The land, with its ancient, weathered stones and whispering winds, bore silent witness to the unspoken pact between man and nature, a pact that had been tested time and again by the harsh vicissitudes of fate. Gideon's resolve crystallized into a singular purpose: to shield his daughter, his legacy, and the very ideals of freedom and resilience that had guided him through decades of tumultuous conflict. Every detail of his plan was etched in his mind: the meticulous coordination of his loyal team, the calculated positioning of his canine sentinels, and the unyielding determination to repel any force that dared to encroach upon his sanctuary. The encroaching darkness was more than just the absence of light, it was a tangible adversary, an ever-present reminder that the battle for control of these lands was far from over. The syndicate's intentions, masked behind layers of deceit and calculated malice, were slowly unraveling before the discerning eyes of a man who had spent his life deciphering the language of war. Even as the distant hum of engines and the murmur of approaching voices grew louder, Gideon Mercer remained a steadfast figure of quiet defiance. In the cool embrace of the encroaching night, he stood resolute, an unyielding guardian whose heart was steeled by the trials of the past and whose spirit burned with the fierce determination to preserve a future untainted by the cruelty of those who sought dominion over his hard-won peace. The first whispers of the syndicate's arrival, carried on the wind and masked by the creaks of ancient timbers, promised that the inevitable confrontation would soon shatter the fragile stillness of the homestead. With every measured breath and every careful glance toward the dark horizon, the seeds of conflict were sown, a conflict that would demand not only the strategic acumen of a seasoned warrior but also the unbreakable bonds of loyalty and love that had been cultivated in the quiet corners of a life dedicated to resilience. Thus, as the night deepened and the first shadows of the intruders merged with the inky blackness of the land, the stage was set for an unfolding drama, a relentless struggle between an unyielding defender and the encroaching tide of those who wished to subjugate the spirit of freedom. As the pale light of dawn crept over the rugged horizon, the homestead's silence was shattered by the unsettling murmur of distant engines and the rustle of clandestine activity in the surrounding brush. The previous night's foreboding had not dissipated. Instead, it had woven itself into the fabric of the day, carrying with it an air of impending confrontation. Gideon Mercer, whose weathered features and resolute gaze had long been tempered by countless battles, rose with a measured determination. The memories of the prior evening's preparations still clung to him like a second skin, and now, as the first hints of sunlight played upon the ancient stones of his estate, he steeled himself for the trials that lay ahead. In the chill of early morning, the sprawling property appeared both tranquil and tense, a paradox of nature and man-made vigilance. Every detail of the homestead, from the fortified barns to the cleverly concealed armories, testified to a singular mission: to protect the legacy of a life built upon sacrifice and perseverance. Gideon's loyal canine companions, their dark eyes ever watchful, patrolled with an instinct born of both training and an unspoken bond with their master. The lead dog, whose powerful stance and quiet intensity seemed to embody the spirit of the land itself, moved with deliberate purpose along the perimeter, alert to every nuance in the shifting light. Yet the calm was deceptive. Beneath the dewy grass and the soft hum of a waking world, the dark tendrils of the Sable Syndicate's influence had taken root. The Syndicate, a ruthless and ever-expanding network of criminal operatives, had been steadily encroaching upon the borderlands, a territory once thought too remote for the machinations of organized crime. In whispered rumors passed between wary townsfolk, their name evoked images of relentless brutality and cunning subterfuge. Their leader, a man known only as Calder Voss, had become a symbol of merciless ambition, his orders delivered with icy precision and executed by a cadre of hardened enforcers. It was said that Voss's operations were marked by a chilling blend of strategic brilliance and unrestrained violence, a combination that had already upended the fragile peace in nearby settlements. Within the safe confines of his estate, Gideon reviewed the intelligence gathered by his trusted network. Several informants had confirmed that the syndicate was planning a coordinated incursion aimed not just at his homestead but at the broader region, a move designed to destabilize any semblance of order and carve out a domain of fear. The signs were unmistakable: unusual traffic on seldom-used roads, the sudden appearance of unmarked vehicles near the perimeter, and coded messages intercepted on radio frequencies known only to those who had once danced with the specter of clandestine warfare. Gideon's thoughts turned to Marisol, his daughter, whose quiet strength belied her youth. Though she had spent the night in the safety of the command center, a repurposed barn reinforced with steel beams and shadowed by vigilant sentinels, her presence was a constant reminder of all that he held dear. In her eyes, he saw not just the reflection of his own determination, but the promise of a future that must be fiercely defended against the encroaching darkness. He recalled her gentle smile from the previous evening, a beacon of hope amid the growing storm, and felt a surge of resolve that pushed him to act with renewed urgency. As the morning matured into a day marked by a relentless blue sky and the quiet rustle of wine through the weathered trees, Gideon convened with his most trusted lieutenants. Among them was Caleb, a former intelligence operative whose analytical mind and unyielding courage had been instrumental in fending off numerous threats over the years. Their silent communication, nurtured through countless shared hardships and victories, allowed them to strategize without the need for verbose exchange. Together, they inspected the perimeter defenses, recalibrated the positioning of surveillance equipment, and ensured that every possible escape route for potential intruders had been accounted for. In the shadows of the homestead's outbuildings, the first signs of the syndicate's approach became disturbingly clear. Unmarked vehicles, their engines low and steady, rolled along the seldom-traveled access road, their headlights masked by the early summer fog. The syndicate's operatives, clad in dark tactical gear that blended seamlessly with the dim surroundings, moved with the coordination of a well-oiled machine. Their presence was both calculated and ominous, a harbinger of the chaos that would soon erupt. Gideon, having anticipated such an eventuality, ordered his team into covert positions. They took up positions behind natural cover and hidden vantage points, eyes fixed on the advancing threat. His mind raced through tactical scenarios honed by years of military discipline and the hard-won lessons of previous skirmishes. Every sound, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the faint murmur of voices exchanging terse commands, even the distant bark of a stray dog, was catalogued and assessed. The tension in the air was palpable, charged with the electricity of imminent battle and the silent promise of retribution. As the syndicate's forces drew nearer, Caleb and the rest of the team initiated a series of subtle countermeasures. Using a network of improvised signals, they coordinated a systematic disruption of the enemy's approach. Hidden traps were set along the main access routes, explosive charges camouflaged beneath piles of debris, tripwires strung through thorny underbrush, and silent alarms rigged to detect any movement across critical junctures. These measures, though rudimentary in appearance, were the culmination of months of painstaking planning and represented a melding of guerrilla tactics with modern surveillance, a synthesis that had served Gideon well in the past. In the midst of these preparations, a quiet tension settled over the homestead. Marisol, now seated in the command center amid a labyrinth of monitors and communication devices, meticulously reviewed the latest intelligence. Her keen mind, sharpened by both academic pursuit and the harsh realities of their existence, caught every nuance in the data feed. The images transmitted from remote cameras revealed a systematic advance by the syndicate's forces, a slow, deliberate maneuver that suggested an intent to envelop the homestead rather than launch an all-out assault immediately. It was a tactical encirclement designed to weaken defenses and sow panic, a method as psychological as it was physical. The day wore on with a deceptive calm. The syndicate's forces, though clearly mobilized for an attack, maintained a measured pace. This allowed Gideon and his team to refine their defensive positions and update contingency plans for a counteroffensive. The quiet rhythm of strategic adjustments was punctuated by moments of sudden adrenaline, a rustle in the underbrush here, a shadow flickering in the corner of an eye there, each of which served as a stark reminder that the enemy was always one step away from breaking the fragile calm. It was during one such moment of heightened alertness that a piercing sound sliced through the quiet, the shrill beep of a sensor triggered by movement along a less guarded trail. Gideon's heart quickened as he exchanged a brief, determined glance with Caleb. They knew that any lapse in vigilance could spell disaster. In a flurry of controlled motion, the team redirected its attention to the new threat. The lead K9, a silent sentinel with an unwavering sense of duty, bounded ahead and intercepted a pair of cloaked figures attempting to flank the eastern perimeter. The ensuing scuffle was brief but brutal. The attackers, caught off guard by the ferocity of the K9's assault, retreated hastily into the fog. This small victory, while hardly decisive in itself, served to galvanize the defenders. The incident underscored the reality that the syndicate's operatives were not only numerous but also agile and resourceful. It forced Gideon to reconsider the possibility that the enemy's tactics might shift from methodical encirclement to rapid, opportunistic strikes. With this in mind, he expanded the network of lookouts and reissued orders to his team. Every shadow, every whisper of wind was now a potential harbinger of hostile intent. By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached a crescendo. The syndicate, recognizing that a direct confrontation was becoming increasingly inevitable, began to deploy heavier assets. The once silent access road now buzzed with the low rumble of armored vehicles and the distant thud of military-grade equipment being positioned for an offensive push. Gideon, ever the tactician, recognized that this escalation signified more than a mere reconnaissance mission. It was the prelude to a full-scale assault aimed at seizing control of his domain. Amid this charged atmosphere, Gideon's mind wandered to the legacy of past conflicts, a montage of battles fought in barren deserts, dense jungles, and the urban labyrinths of long-forgotten cities. Each memory, though steeped in hardship, reinforced the belief that the fight for freedom was never an exercise in futility. It was a battle of wits, courage, and the unwavering conviction that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one could carve out a sanctuary of hope. With these thoughts as his guide, he resolved to meet the syndicate's advance not with fear or resignation, but with the resolute defiance of a man who had weathered the storms of history. In the final hours before dusk, the encroaching enemy began to coalesce into a formation that bore the unmistakable hallmarks of a pincer movement. The syndicate's strategy was now evident, a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm the eastern and southern flanks simultaneously, leaving the homestead's central defenses isolated and vulnerable. It was a maneuver that required both precision and speed, a calculated risk that hinged on the enemy's confidence in their ability to catch the defenders off balance. Gideon's response was swift and uncompromising. He ordered Caleb and the other key operatives to activate the next phase of their counteroffensive, a series of diversions intended to confuse and delay the syndicate's advance. Smoke screens were released from hidden canisters, and controlled detonations were set to create disorienting flashes of light and sound along the targeted flanks. These actions, executed with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill, provided the defenders with critical moments of respite, moments that could be the difference between survival and annihilation. Throughout the unfolding drama, the homestead itself seemed to come alive as a character in its own right. The ancient trees swaying at the periphery, the weathered stone walls that had withstood decades of turbulent storms, and even the gentle murmur of a distant creek all contributed to an atmosphere charged with both natural resilience and the indomitable spirit of man. Each element of the landscape, each hidden alcove and sunlit clearing, played a role in the unfolding battle, serving as both sanctuary and battlefield in the timeless struggle between order and chaos. As dusk finally descended, painting the sky with hues of deep indigo and smoldering crimson, the stage was set for what promised to be a decisive confrontation. The syndicate's forces, now arrayed in a formation that spoke of both brutality and calculated intent, advanced with a silent, inexorable determination. In the flickering light of hastily erected torches, their faces were obscured by shadows and hardened by the certainty of their purpose. For Gideon Mercer and his defenders, every heartbeat was a countdown to the moment when the fragile line between peace and pandemonium would be irrevocably redrawn. In that charged twilight, as the homestead braced itself against the coming onslaught, the air itself seemed to vibrate with the echoes of past battles and the unspoken promise of retribution. Gideon, standing at the precipice of what might be the defining moment of his long and arduous journey, felt a surge of both dread and fierce determination. His eyes, darkened by the weight of countless memories yet alight with the fire of unyielding resolve, scanned the horizon where enemy forces converged. In that moment, the quiet before the storm was replaced by an almost tangible electricity, a sense that the coming clash would not only determine the fate of his cherished sanctuary but would also serve as a crucible for the enduring spirit of those who dared to dream of a world free from tyranny. Thus, with every heartbeat echoing the silent cadence of impending conflict, the homestead transformed from a bastion of solitude into a battlefield where courage and cunning would be tested to their very limits. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the only certainty was that when the first shots rang out beneath the gathering darkness, there would be no turning back from the irreversible tide of destiny. As darkness fully claimed the land and the last vestiges of twilight faded into an almost impenetrable black, the homestead's defenses braced for the inevitable collision of opposing forces. The calculated diversions and smoke screens that had momentarily disoriented the syndicate's operatives had done little to dispel the mounting tension. Instead, they had merely postponed the inevitable clash. Gideon Mercer, whose steely resolve had been forged in the crucible of countless past conflicts, stood in silent vigil at the highest point of his property, surveying the encroaching silhouettes of enemy forces under a sky speckled with the cold light of distant stars. The atmosphere was charged with an almost tangible energy, a convergence of anticipation and raw, unyielding determination that pulsed through the very ground beneath their feet. The remnants of the syndicate's assault, having been momentarily stalled by the earlier diversions, now regrouped with a renewed vigor. Their movements were deliberate, each step measured to perfection, as if the enemy understood that this night's outcome would determine the balance of power in the entire region. In the dark, rugged landscape, every rustle of foliage and every whisper of wind carried the weight of impending violence, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test the limits of human endurance and strategic acumen. Within the fortified walls of the homestead, the atmosphere was no less electric. The command center, a room carved out of old stone and reinforced with modern technology, buzzed quietly with the hushed conversations of Gideon's most trusted aides. Caleb, whose mind was as sharp as the tactical knives hidden in his belt, scrutinized the live feeds from the network of cameras strategically positioned around the estate. His eyes, scanning rapidly over the shifting images, noted every movement, every potential threat that slithered into view. Alongside him, the homestead's other key operatives coordinated their positions, their actions a symphony of silent communication that had been honed over years of shared hardship. Marisol, seated before a bank of monitors and tactical screens, methodically logged every anomaly in the enemy's formations. Though young in years, she carried a wisdom beyond her age, a maturity that was the product of years living under the shadow of danger. Her eyes flickered with equal parts determination and sorrow as she observed the relentless advance of the Syndicate's forces. The night's events had taken a toll on her, yet in every measured click and every deliberate keystroke lay an unspoken promise, that the sanctity of their home, their lives, would be defended at any cost. Beyond the immediate confines of the homestead, the surrounding landscape became a theater of war. The natural elements, the rugged hills, the dense stands of weathered pines, and the narrow winding trails, were co-opted into the elaborate tapestry of Gideon's defensive strategy. In the cold darkness, every boulder, every thicket was imbued with tactical significance, serving as either a shield against the enemy's onslaught or a potential ambush point waiting to be exploited. Gideon's loyal dogs, ever the silent sentinels of his legacy, moved with practiced precision. Their low, measured growls and sudden bursts of energy indicated that even in the chaotic ballet of war, nature itself had been enlisted as an ally in the battle for survival. The first signs of open conflict emerged as a sudden, harsh clatter broke the stillness of the night. From the depths of the forested perimeter, a contingent of Syndicate operatives surged forward, their bodies low to the ground as they navigated through the rough terrain. Their movements were almost balletic in their precision, yet beneath the surface lay a brutal intent that was unmistakable. Gideon's eyes narrowed as he recognized the distinct formation, a pincer movement designed to encircle the homestead and isolate its defenders. Without hesitation, he signaled his team, and the defensive formation sprang into action with the speed of a well-rehearsed drill. The ensuing moments were a chaotic tapestry of light and shadow, punctuated by the thunder of gunfire and the visceral barks of alert canines. The Syndicate's initial wave, comprised of lightly armored but agile fighters, attempted to breach the outer defenses. However, they were met with a barrage of calculated resistance. Caleb, positioned at a concealed vantage point, unleashed a volley of precise, suppressive fire that temporarily halted the attackers' advance. At the same time, several of Gideon's loyal dogs leapt from their hiding places, their powerful bodies colliding with the intruders in a maelstrom of snarls and the crack of impact. The clash was fierce and disorienting, a swirling dance of danger and determination where each combatant's survival hinged on split-second decisions and the strength of their convictions. Amid the fray, the homestead itself seemed to come alive with a spirit of defiance. The stone walls, worn smooth by the passage of time yet unyielding in the face of chaos, echoed with the sounds of conflict. Hidden passages and secret exits, long forgotten relics of a more turbulent era, suddenly found new purpose as emergency escape routes and fallback positions. Gideon moved through the chaos with an almost preternatural calm, his every step measured and deliberate. The tactical experience of his youth, honed in battles where the stakes were as high as life itself, now manifested in his ability to predict the enemy's moves and counter them with a blend of instinct and precision. As the skirmish deepened, the battle began to shift from the outer perimeter into the heart of the homestead. The Syndicate, having tasted a measure of success on the outskirts, pressed their advantage with renewed determination. Shadows lengthened as they crept toward the central compound, where the command center lay at the core of Gideon's operations. The air was thick with the acrid tang of gunpowder and the metallic scent of adrenaline, every breath a reminder of the stakes at hand. In this maelstrom, the boundaries between friend and foe blurred as the chaos of battle allowed even the most meticulously planned defenses to falter under the strain of rapid, unpredictable engagements. At one critical juncture, a small unit of operatives managed to breach a secondary wall near the service wing of the homestead. The infiltrators, armed with both brute force and surprising ingenuity, attempted to seize control of an auxiliary armory, an installation stocked with high-caliber munitions and tactical gear that could tip the balance in the Syndicate's favor. The discovery of this breach sent shockwaves through Gideon's command center. Marisol's fingers flew over the keyboard as she rerouted security feeds, while Caleb mobilized a rapid response team to contain the incursion. In the ensuing minutes, a ferocious exchange of close-quarters combat ensued. The confined corridors of the service wing echoed with the sound of clashing bodies and the staccato rhythm of desperate gunfire. The defenders, fueled by a potent mix of duty and fear, managed to drive the invaders back, their retreat marked by a flurry of shattered glass and desperate shouts lost in the cacophony of war. Throughout the night, the battle raged on with relentless intensity. Each skirmish, each brief lull between bursts of violence, was marked by a silent understanding among Gideon's ranks, that every moment of hesitation might cost them dearly. The Syndicate's forces, though numerous and emboldened by their earlier successes, began to show signs of strain. The intricate interplay of strategic diversions and unexpected counterattacks had sown seeds of doubt in their meticulously organized assault. Yet, even as the tide of battle ebbed and flowed, there remained an unspoken promise among Gideon's defenders, a vow to protect the legacy of the homestead, to safeguard the promise of a future free from the clutches of tyranny. In the midst of the chaos, Gideon found a moment of quiet introspection as he maneuvered through a narrow passageway between reinforced pillars. His mind, a repository of memories both bitter and triumphant, replayed the images of past victories and personal losses. Every scar on his weathered face, every twitch of muscle honed by years of combat, told a story of survival and sacrifice. It was a journey that had led him from the darkest corridors of clandestine warfare to the rugged solitude of the frontier, a journey that had prepared him for this very moment of reckoning. As he paused briefly, his gaze swept over the scattered remnants of the invaders, the fractured remnants of what had once been a disciplined force now reduced to a disoriented horde. In that fleeting moment, Gideon's resolve crystallized even further, as if the very act of witnessing the enemy's disarray reinforced his belief that the fight was not only necessary but righteous. The night wore on with a merciless cadence, each minute stretching into an eternity of combat and calculation. The defenders regrouped, reassessing their positions, and launching coordinated counterattacks that exploited every chink in the Syndicate's armor. The battle lines were redrawn with every passing moment, shifting as rapidly as the dark shapes moving under the cover of night. Gideon, ever the tactician, ordered subtle adjustments in the positioning of his forces, redistributing his men and resources to counter emerging threats. The interplay of strategy and improvisation was a dance as old as war itself, and in that deadly ballet, both sides strove to assert their dominance over the battleground. As the first hints of pre-dawn light began to creep over the horizon, the intensity of the conflict reached its zenith. The Syndicate, realizing that the night was slipping away and that their window of opportunity was closing, launched one final, desperate offensive. A surge of operatives poured into the central courtyard, their faces set in grim determination as they attempted to break through the last line of defense. The defenders, emboldened by the hardships of the night and the clarity of their purpose, met this renewed assault with a ferocity that bordered on the feral. In the central courtyard, a place that had seen both the quiet dignity of peaceful life and the brutal indignities of war, the clash escalated into a full-scale melee. Every inch of ground became a contested zone, every building a bastion of hope against the tide of chaos. Within the swirling vortex of conflict, Gideon's figure emerged as a beacon of steadfast resistance. Moving with the deliberate precision of a seasoned warrior, he led a small contingent through the enemy's flanks, their silhouettes merging with the dim light of early morning. The maneuver, executed with the subtle grace of a master strategist, aimed to sever the enemy's supply lines and disrupt their command structure. The battle, which until then had been characterized by brutal frontal assaults, now evolved into a series of rapid, coordinated strikes designed to isolate and neutralize key enemy units. As Gideon pressed forward, his mind remained focused on the singular objective of preserving the sanctity of the homestead, the very embodiment of a dream long fought for. In the ensuing minutes, the clash reached a fevered pitch. Explosions punctuated the air as strategically placed charges detonated, sending plumes of smoke and shards of metal into the frigid air. The cacophony of violence, the roar of collapsing structures, the relentless staccato of gunfire, and the visceral, primal sounds of combat, melded into an overwhelming symphony that bore witness to the night's unyielding brutality. Amid the chaos, each member of Gideon's force found themselves pushed to the limits of their endurance, their actions a testament to the unspoken creed that had brought them together, that the defense of their home was sacred, a duty that transcended personal sacrifice. By the time the first full rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the battlefield bore the unmistakable marks of a titanic struggle. The syndicate's once formidable ranks had been thinned and scattered, their initial cohesion shattered by the relentless counteroffensive. The homestead, though battered and scarred by the night's conflict, still stood as an unyielding fortress, a testament to the indomitable will of those who had fought to protect it. Gideon Mercer, with the weight of the past and the promise of the future etched into every line of his face, surveyed the aftermath of the battle with a measured, almost stoic calm. The enemy had been repelled for now, but the scars of the night would serve as a constant reminder that the struggle was far from over. In the quiet moments that followed, as wounded men were tended to and the remnants of the syndicate's assault were methodically cleared from the grounds, the homestead's defenders gathered to reaffirm their resolve. There was no time for celebration in the face of the ever-present threat that loomed on the horizon, a threat that would continue to test the limits of their courage and ingenuity. Yet, even in the solemn aftermath, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that the darkness that had descended upon their land would eventually give way to a new day, one forged in the fires of perseverance and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty. The early morning light bathed the scarred landscape in a gentle glow, softening the harsh edges of battle and revealing the enduring spirit of a community united by purpose. Gideon, Caleb, Marisol, and the rest of the defenders moved with a cautious optimism as they began the arduous task of regrouping and fortifying their position for the challenges that lay ahead. Every shattered remnant of enemy equipment, every scar on the once pristine walls of the homestead, told a story of sacrifice and determination, a narrative that would be etched into the annals of their struggle for survival. In that transformative hour between night and day, as the homestead slowly emerged from the shadow of the night's violence, the echoes of battle served not only as a reminder of the cost of defiance but also as a rallying cry for the trials yet to come. The syndicate's remnants, though beaten back, would undoubtedly regroup and return with fresh resolve. And so, even as the first rays of the sun illuminated the battered but unbowed walls of the homestead, Gideon Mercer's vigilant gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon, a horizon that held both the promise of dawn and the uncertainty of future conflicts. Thus, with the cold light of morning now revealing a terrain forever altered by the night's carnage, the defenders of the homestead prepared themselves to face whatever challenges might arise. In every measured step and every lingering glance toward the scarred remnants of enemy lines, the message was clear: the battle was not over, and the fight for freedom would continue, as relentless and unyielding as the human spirit itself. In the uncertain hours following the night's ferocious battle, the battered homestead lay in a state of wary suspension, a moment of tenuous calm between relentless storms of conflict. As the pale morning light filtered through the fractured windows of the command center, Gideon Mercer surveyed the aftermath with a gaze heavy with both sorrow and resolve. The night's tumult had left deep scars upon the land and the souls of those who had fought, and now the survivors gathered among the ruins to mend what could be salvaged and prepare for what might come next. The field that once resonated with the sounds of desperate combat now echoed with the murmurs of men tending to wounds and salvaging what little hope remained. Gideon, his face lined with exhaustion and etched by the relentless march of time, moved deliberately through the camp. He paused before a cluster of makeshift tents where his most trusted lieutenants and medics worked in silence to treat the injured. In that quiet interlude, every subtle gesture, a lingering hand on a shoulder, a steadying glance exchanged between comrades, spoke volumes of the unspoken bond that had been forged in the crucible of shared adversity. While the defenders of the homestead labored to rebuild their shattered defenses, Caleb took on the task of re-establishing communication with their scattered network of scouts and informants. From a corner of the command center, lit only by the flicker of battery-powered screens and the muted glow of distant fires, he deciphered fresh intelligence that painted a grim picture. Far beyond the immediate vicinity, emissaries of the Sable Syndicate, now led by a newly emerged figure known as Vance Radcliffe, had regrouped. Radcliffe, whose icy determination and strategic ruthlessness had been whispered about in hushed tones, was consolidating forces for a larger, more coordinated assault. The intelligence indicated that Radcliffe was not merely interested in reclaiming lost ground, his designs were to shatter the last vestiges of order in the region and establish a stranglehold that would make the Syndicate's reign nearly unassailable. Marisol, ever the vigilant sentinel behind the screens, painstakingly pieced together the fragmented streams of data. Despite her youth, she had grown into a formidable operator whose analytical prowess rivaled that of any seasoned strategist. As she monitored the shifting dynamics of enemy movements, her eyes revealed a storm of inner turmoil, a mixture of fear for the future and a burning determination to forge a safe haven from the encroaching darkness. In quiet moments, she recalled the innocence of earlier days, a life before the brutal realities of warfare had replaced her dreams with a hardened resolve, and vowed silently that the sacrifices of today would someday nurture a brighter dawn. The homestead itself, a sprawling compound of weathered stone and resilient timber, bore witness to centuries of history, and now it was being transformed into a fortress of defiance. Over the course of that somber morning, every available resource was mobilized, the old barns were converted into bunkers, hidden caches of weaponry were unearthed from beneath floorboards, and the once idyllic orchards became strategic observation posts. The very soil of the land, which had nurtured generations of humble tillers and dreamers, was now interlaced with the modern trappings of guerrilla warfare, a poignant reminder that peace, when hard won, was a fragile bloom amid a field of perpetual strife. Gideon convened a somber council in the main hall, a cavernous space where the stained glass windows, though cracked, still caught the light in fractured patterns of hope and defiance. Here, surrounded by trusted veterans and the few remaining stalwarts who had weathered the night storm, he laid out a plan not merely for survival, but for a counteroffensive that would turn the tide. He spoke in measured tones, each word deliberate and heavy with the burden of responsibility. The strategy was audacious, to strike at the heart of Radcliffe's operations by intercepting a crucial supply convoy that was rumored to be laden with the tools of war, ammunition, communications gear, and vehicles rigged for rapid assault. The intelligence was scant and perilous, but it offered a glimmer of opportunity. If they could cripple the Syndicate's resupply line, even temporarily, it might sow the seeds of confusion and weaken the enemy's grip on the region. As the council dispersed into smaller task forces, each assigned a critical role in the unfolding plan, Gideon found a moment to retreat into a private alcove overlooking the vast, open plains beyond the homestead. There, amidst the whispering grasses and the distant silhouettes of rugged hills, he allowed himself a brief reprieve. In those solitary moments, memories of battles past and lost comrades mingled with the present reality, a harsh reminder of the ceaseless cycle of hope and despair. The scars of previous campaigns, both physical and emotional, served as constant companions, yet, it was precisely these experiences that fueled his unyielding determination to protect the legacy of his family and the hard-won sanctuary they had built. Back at the command center, Caleb and a select group of operatives prepared for a night operation aimed at intercepting the supply convoy. They meticulously mapped out the terrain based on satellite images and local reconnaissance, identifying a narrow mountain pass that would force the convoy to slow down, a tactical choke point ripe for exploitation. Every detail was scrutinized, the position of natural obstacles, the likely routes of enemy patrols, and even the subtle shifts in wind direction that could betray the movement of vehicles. In a display of disciplined precision, the team distributed roles among themselves, Some were to ambush the convoy with long-range rifles and improvised explosives, while others were tasked with establishing a rapid extraction point in the event of a swift enemy counterattack. As dusk approached once more, the air grew chillier, and the remnants of the earlier battle gave way to an eerie silence that belied the turmoil simmering just beneath the surface. The sky overhead, a vast canvas of deepening blues and smoldering purples, provided a haunting backdrop to the somber preparations. The ambush team, clad in dark and tactical gear that blended with the encroaching shadows, crept silently along the predetermined route. Their footsteps were muffled by the damp earth, and every breath seemed to be a measured exhalation of tension and resolve. Among them was a new figure, Jonas Reed, a veteran of conflicts both near and far, whose grizzled exterior and penetrating eyes bespoke a lifetime of hardship and survival. Jonas, though a recent addition to the inner circle, had quickly earned the respect of his peers for his unwavering commitment and resourcefulness in the field. In a secluded ridge that offered a commanding view of the narrow mountain pass, the ambush team took up their positions. They concealed themselves behind clusters of jagged boulders and dense thickets, their weapons at the ready. From this vantage point, they could see the dim glow of headlights emerging in the distance, a sign that the enemy convoy was nearing the choke point. As the first vehicles began to appear, their engines a low and steady drone that vibrated through the still air, the tension escalated to an almost unbearable crescendo. Every operative knew that the success of this mission would be pivotal. A well-executed ambush could not only halt the flow of enemy supplies but also serve as a catalyst for a broader counteroffensive. Simultaneously, back at the homestead, Gideon continued to orchestrate the defensive and counteroffensive maneuvers with the precision of a seasoned general. His mind raced with tactical possibilities even as he managed the logistical challenges of rallying scattered forces for rapid redeployment. The day's grim harvest of casualties and the weight of loss had not dampened his spirit, rather, it had steeled him against the encroaching despair. The old stone walls, which had borne silent witness to decades of conflict and change, now echoed with the determined steps of those preparing to strike back against an enemy that had dared to test their resolve. Under the cloak of the approaching night, as the ambush team maintained their vigil along the ridge, a sudden shift in the wind carried with it an unexpected sound, a subtle but distinct rumble that grew steadily louder. The enemy convoy, now fully committed to its journey through the narrow pass, began to enter the kill zone. In that fateful moment, every second stretched into an eternity. The operatives exchanged brief nods and tightened their grips on their weapons, their hearts pounding in unison with the rhythm of destiny. The quiet before the storm had reached its zenith, and the stage was set for an ambush that promised to be as decisive as it was ruthless. With a series of well-coordinated signals, hand gestures honed through countless drills, the ambush team unleashed their meticulously planned assault. In an eruption of calculated violence, explosive charges hidden beneath layers of rubble detonated simultaneously, sending a shockwave of chaos through the convoy. The vehicles, caught in the sudden maelstrom of destruction, were thrown into disarray. Amid the ensuing pandemonium, the operatives emerged from their concealment with the cold precision of predators pouncing on vulnerable prey. Gunfire erupted in rapid, staccato bursts as the ambush team engaged the enemy with unyielding ferocity, each shot echoing the bitter resolve of those who had nothing left to lose but the hope for a better tomorrow. The battle in the narrow pass was both brutal and swift. Jonas Reed, leading one of the flanking elements, maneuvered with an almost preternatural agility through the chaotic melee. His experience in urban warfare lent him an instinct for exploiting every available cover, and he quickly moved to isolate a group of enemy soldiers who had become separated from their main force. The ensuing exchange was a whirlwind of rapid-fire engagements and desperate struggles, every moment underscored by the raw intensity of life-or-death combat. Meanwhile, Caleb's team, positioned at the extraction point, maintained a vigilant watch over the unfolding ambush. Their role was to secure the retreat of the operatives once the enemy supply lines had been sufficiently disrupted, a delicate operation that required both timing and unwavering focus. Back at the homestead, the impact of the ambush reverberated through the ranks of the defenders. The successful interception of the enemy convoy provided a much-needed boost to their morale, even as the bitter taste of loss still lingered in every heart. The news, relayed in hushed and reverent tones through crackling radio transmissions, spurred Gideon to initiate a series of coordinated countermeasures aimed at exploiting the temporary disarray among Radcliffe's forces. The ambush had not only deprived the syndicate of vital supplies but had also sowed seeds of uncertainty among its ranks, a critical advantage that Gideon intended to leverage in the coming days. As the remnants of the enemy convoy lay smoldering amid the rugged terrain of the mountain pass, the ambush team began their methodical withdrawal. Every operative retraced their steps with a disciplined urgency, their movements synchronized as if orchestrated by an unseen conductor. The night resumed its solemn silence as the ambush team melted back into the darkness, leaving behind only the echoes of their resolute strike and the lingering scent of smoke and charred metal. In the early hours before dawn, as the wounded were tended to and the fallen were honored with quiet, heartfelt tributes, Gideon convened an emergency meeting with his senior commanders. The success of the ambush, while a significant tactical victory, was but one chapter in an ever-escalating conflict. They analyzed the new intelligence, recalibrated their defenses, and began planning for a counteroffensive that would push the enemy further back from the borders of their cherished sanctuary. The scars of the previous night's engagements, both visible and hidden deep within, served as a stark reminder that every victory came at a high cost, a cost that must be weighed against the promise of eventual peace. In that dim light of pre-dawn, the homestead's inhabitants found a renewed sense of purpose. The land, ravaged by conflict yet still unbowed, seemed to whisper tales of resilience and defiance. Gideon's steady leadership, Caleb's tactical acumen, Marisol's unwavering vigilance, and the valor of every operative had rekindled a fragile hope, a belief that even in the midst of war's unyielding darkness, the human spirit could forge a path toward a better future. The ambush had proven that the enemy was not invincible, that every calculated strike, every sacrificial act of courage, could chip away at the monolithic facade of tyranny. With the first tentative rays of dawn beginning to pierce the horizon, the defenders of the homestead set about restoring their battered compound and preparing for the inevitable return of the syndicate's forces. Their efforts were methodical and resolute, driven by the understanding that this was not a moment for repose but a call to arms, a reminder that the fight for freedom was as enduring as the land itself. In the silent communion of their efforts, each man and woman present pledged anew to the cause of safeguarding the legacy of their forebears and to carving out a future free from the shadows of oppression. Thus, as the morning sun rose to illuminate a scarred yet unyielding expanse, the defenders steeled themselves for the long, arduous campaign ahead. In every whispered promise, every determined glance, and every act of valor, the narrative of their struggle was being written anew, a narrative that, despite the darkness and the bloodshed, held within it the promise of redemption and the unquenchable flame of hope. In the days following the ambush, the homestead settled into a rhythm of cautious recovery and relentless preparation. The scars of the previous assaults, both on the land and in the hearts of its defenders, served as a stark reminder of the battle that had unfolded, while also galvanizing a determination that burned brighter with every new dawn. Gideon Mercer, whose quiet command had become the backbone of the resistance, led his people with an unyielding focus. Each moment was spent in the crucible of planning and repair, for it was clear that the enemy's resolve would not waver and that a fresh wave of aggression was only a matter of time. In the wake of the ambush, the homestead's repair crews worked feverishly to mend broken structures and re-establish the defensive perimeters. The once battered stone walls were reinforced with salvaged materials and modern reinforcements, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who refused to yield to despair. Under Gideon's watchful eye, teams scouted the surrounding terrain for any signs of enemy reinforcements, while other units focused on fortifying the choke points that had proved so vulnerable during the previous onslaught. The land, rugged and unforgiving, had borne the brunt of the violence and now whispered secrets of both resilience and imminent peril in the rustling of the wind. Caleb, whose tactical mind never rested, convened with his closest lieutenants in the newly established operations room, a converted barn that now served as the nerve center of their ongoing resistance. Maps and satellite images were spread out across a scarred wooden table, their surfaces marked with the scars of previous engagements and annotated with potential enemy routes. Every detail was scrutinized with a precision born of both necessity and desperation. The data, gathered from a network of local scouts and intercepted communications, indicated that Vance Radcliffe's forces were regrouping in a nearby valley, a strategic location that offered both concealment and access to key supply routes. It was in this valley that the syndicate sought to amass the strength required for a renewed assault. A plan that threatened to engulf the entire region in chaos if left unchecked. Marisol, whose keen intellect and indomitable spirit had evolved through years of hardship, worked tirelessly from the command center. She coordinated with allied groups in distant settlements, farmers, traders, and former soldiers, who had pledged their loyalty to the cause. Their communications, transmitted through a mix of encrypted digital channels and old-fashioned radio frequencies, formed the backbone of a decentralized intelligence network. In quiet, determined moments, she cross-referenced the enemy's movements with historical battle patterns, seeking to predict where and when the next strike might come. Her efforts were driven by an understanding that every moment spent unprepared was a moment stolen from the fragile promise of peace. Amid these daily toils, the human cost of their struggle was felt keenly. The wounded, both physically and emotionally, were cared for in a makeshift infirmary set up in a repurposed barn. The air there was heavy with the scent of antiseptics and the murmurs of quiet prayers, while medics moved briskly among the injured, their practiced hands steadying those who had been caught in the vortex of violence. Each life that was saved was a victory against the darkness, yet every loss weighed on the collective conscience of the defenders. In the soft glow of lamplight during the long nights, stories of bravery and sacrifice were shared in hushed tones, a living chronicle of resilience that bolstered the spirits of those who were beginning to question whether the endless cycle of conflict might ever find its end. The natural world around the homestead, ever unyielding, continued its silent testimony to both the passage of time and the inexorable march of nature. The rugged hills and sprawling meadows, once the backdrop to simpler times, now served as strategic assets and symbolic reminders of the beauty worth fighting for. Gideon often took solitary walks along the ridge at the edge of the property, his footsteps a meditative cadence on the uneven ground. In these moments of solitude, the scars of the past merged with the promise of a future yet unwritten. The interplay of light and shadow on the ancient stones and the distant cry of a hawk overhead wove a tapestry of hope amid the constant threat of violence. The enemy, though temporarily thwarted, had not retreated into the shadows. Instead, Radcliffe's forces were gathering strength, their communications becoming increasingly frequent and their movements more coordinated. Rumors spread among the local populace that the syndicate was planning an ambitious campaign to cut off the homestead's access to its vital supply routes, a move that would not only strangle the defenders economically but also isolate them from the broader network of allies. This intelligence spurred Gideon to call for a council of war, summoning all his lieutenants and trusted advisors to deliberate on the next strategic move. The atmosphere in the war room was charged with a blend of urgency and cautious optimism. Every word exchanged was laden with the gravity of their situation and the unspoken hope that their collective expertise might turn the tide. In the ensuing discussions, it became evident that a preemptive strike might offer the only viable path to disrupt the enemy's momentum. The plan was audacious yet necessary, to launch a covert operation deep into the valley where Radcliffe's forces were massing. This incursion, if successful, would strike at the enemy's logistical nerve, severing the supply lines and sowing confusion among the ranks of the syndicate. Gideon, ever the stoic leader, listened intently as Caleb and Marisol outlined the proposed operation with meticulous detail. They spoke of infiltration routes through narrow ravines, of nights spent in ambush positions under the cloak of darkness, and of the silent signals that would communicate the success, or failure, of their daring assault. The plan, though fraught with risk, was embraced by those present as the only beacon of hope in an ever-darkening landscape. Preparations for the mission commenced with a silent flurry of activity. Gideon handpicked a select group of operatives whose skills had been honed by years of hardship and whose loyalty to the cause was unwavering. Among them was Jonas Reed, whose valor in previous skirmishes had become the stuff of local legend, and a new recruit named Elena Torres, a resourceful tracker with a background in reconnaissance and survival, whose sharp eyes and quicker wits had already earned her the respect of her comrades. Together, this small team was charged with the task of infiltrating the enemy's camp, gathering vital intelligence, and if possible, executing a surgical strike that would cripple Radcliffe's burgeoning war machine. Under the cloak of a moonless night, the team set out on their perilous journey. They moved with the silence of shadows through dense undergrowth and across open fields, their progress marked only by the soft rustle of leaves and the measured cadence of well-rehearsed steps. Every rustle, every distant sound was a potential threat, an enemy scout, a stray patrol, or even the mere whisper of betrayal carried by the wind. The stakes were impossibly high, for failure would not only mean the loss of valuable lives but also the irreversible sealing of the fate of their homeland. Yet, in the hearts of the operatives burned a fierce determination, a shared belief that their actions, however small in the grand tapestry of war, could alter the course of destiny. As the team advanced deeper into the valley, the terrain transformed into a labyrinth of narrow canyons and hidden alcoves. The natural fortifications of the landscape were both an asset and a peril, providing cover and concealment while also presenting unpredictable obstacles. Elena's expertise became indispensable as she guided the group through treacherous passes and along ancient trails worn smooth by the passage of time. In the stillness of the nocturnal hours, every rock and tree seemed to hold secrets, whispering warnings of the dangers that lay ahead. The air was thick with anticipation, and even the silence itself appeared to pulse with the unspoken promise of conflict. Within the enemy's camp, Radcliffe's forces had begun to stir. The valley, cloaked in darkness and filled with the soft murmur of preparatory activity, was a hive of disciplined yet furtive movements. The camp was arranged in a loose formation, designed to facilitate rapid mobilization should the need arise, yet it lacked the rigidity of a fully entrenched position. This subtle vulnerability was noted by the infiltrators, a chink in the otherwise formidable armor of the syndicate's presence. Caleb's voice, transmitted quietly over secure channels, relayed the critical intelligence back to the homestead. The information confirmed that Radcliffe himself was overseeing the operations, a detail that only heightened the urgency of the mission. In the heart of the enemy encampment, the infiltrators split into smaller cells, each tasked with a specific objective. One group was to plant discrete surveillance devices that would monitor enemy communications and movements. Another was charged with mapping the intricate network of supply routes that crisscrossed the valley. Meanwhile, a third cell, led by Jonas and Elena, was to identify the key logistical nodes, stockpiles of munitions, fuel caches, and the critical junctions of enemy transport routes. Every observation was recorded with painstaking detail, for even the smallest piece of intelligence could serve as the keystone for a future counteroffensive. As the night deepened, the tension in the enemy camp became almost palpable. Radcliffe's presence, though elusive, cast a long shadow over the proceedings. The infiltrators moved silently among the structures, temporary shelters hastily erected from tarpaulin and salvaged wood, guard towers manned by vigilant sentries, and a central command tent that radiated an aura of authoritative control. In these moments, the operatives felt the weight of history upon their shoulders, a history marked by countless battles, unyielding sacrifice, and the indomitable will to protect a way of life that was slipping away into the mists of time. The hours before dawn were a liminal space between night and day. Hope and despair. In that fragile darkness, the operatives gathered what intelligence they could and prepared for their extraction. Each moment was charged with a duality, the thrill of a covert victory and the omnipresent threat of discovery. As the first hints of pre-dawn light began to seep into the valley, Jonas and Elena signaled that their mission had yielded vital intelligence. The gathered data promised to expose vulnerabilities in Radcliffe's defenses and offered a blueprint for an operation that could strike a decisive blow to the syndicate supply lines. Back at the homestead, the transmission of this critical intelligence ignited a spark of cautious optimism among the defenders. In the war room, where maps and data intermingled with the shared breaths of determined souls, Gideon and his commanders pored over the newly acquired information. The enemy's positions were redrawn in stark detail, revealing weak points and potential ambush sites that had previously gone unnoticed. The plan for a retaliatory counteroffensive began to take shape, a daring, meticulously orchestrated maneuver that aimed not only to disrupt the enemy's operations but to send a clear message that the homestead's defenders would not be cowed into submission. With the intelligence secured, the infiltrators made their careful withdrawal, retracing their steps through the labyrinthine terrain. Their journey back was fraught with tension, every sound and shadow a potential threat, yet their determination never wavered. The operatives returned to the homestead with the precious data that could redefine the balance of power in the valley. In the quiet moments following their return, as they debriefed with Caleb and Marisol, the enormity of their task settled over them like a mantle. They had risked everything to deliver a key to victory, a key that, if wielded with precision and courage, might finally turn the tide against the relentless onslaught of the Sable Syndicate. Thus, as the valley awoke to the soft hues of a new day, the defenders of the homestead began the laborious process of transforming intelligence into action. Plans were redrafted, supply lines resecured, and new ambush points established in anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. Gideon Mercer, standing at the precipice of a renewed battle, felt a surge of resolute determination. The lives of his people, the legacy of those who had fallen, and the fragile promise of a peaceful future now converged in this singular moment of calculated defiance. The mission in the valley had been a success in more ways than one. It had not only provided the critical information needed to mount a decisive counteroffensive, but it had also reaffirmed the unbreakable bond between those who fought to protect a way of life that was as enduring as the rugged land itself. In the days that followed, every member of the homestead's small but formidable force worked in unison, transforming the gathered intelligence into a comprehensive battle plan. The enemy's vulnerabilities, now laid bare in stark clarity, became the fulcrum upon which the next phase of the resistance would pivot. As preparations reached a fevered pitch, Gideon's steady leadership and the collective spirit of his defenders shone like a beacon in the darkness, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit could rise, defiant and unyielding, to reclaim its destiny. In the wake of the detailed reconnaissance and the renewed strategic planning, the homestead's defenders felt a cautious optimism begin to crystallize into purpose. The new day ushered in an atmosphere heavy with anticipation, where every whisper of wind and every rustle in the underbrush was laden with the promise of imminent retribution. Gideon Mercer, standing as the unyielding figurehead of this determined resistance, surveyed his gathered forces with a mixture of steely resolve and reflective introspection. The scars of past battles were visible in every weathered line on his face and in the determined set of his jaw, yet his eyes held a spark of defiant hope, a hope that was shared by every soul who had pledged to protect the legacy of their beleaguered sanctuary. Over the ensuing days, the homestead transformed into a hive of activity as men and women, bound together by a singular purpose, toiled tirelessly to translate intelligence into actionable plans. The once quiet compound was now abuzz with strategic meetings held in rooms that had long been repurposed for war. Large maps sprawled across heavy wooden tables were redrawn with meticulous care, marking out enemy supply routes, critical choke points, and potential ambush sites that the infiltrators had so painstakingly uncovered. Caleb, whose analytical prowess was matched only by his relentless dedication, led these sessions with a voice that resonated calm authority. His fingers traced potential routes and fallback positions as he explained the merits and risks of each option, ensuring that every operative present was intimately familiar with the nuances of the enemy's network. Marisol, whose intellect had matured into a formidable force in its own right, became the central conduit for real-time intelligence updates. From her command center, a room bathed in the soft glow of monitors and filled with the quiet hum of data transmissions, she coordinated a web of communication that spanned several allied communities. Farmers, traders, and retired soldiers alike contributed observations and coded reports, painting a picture of an enemy that was dynamic and constantly shifting. With each new piece of information, the tapestry of Radcliffe's operation grew clearer, revealing vulnerabilities that Gideon and his team were determined to exploit. Her steady presence and sharp insights inspired a renewed sense of confidence among the defenders, who began to see the enemy not as an insurmountable force, but as a network whose weak points could be targeted with surgical precision. The natural environment around the homestead, once seen only as a backdrop for daily labor, assumed new significance as an integral part of the defensive strategy. The sprawling fields and rugged hills were surveyed once again, this time with an eye for tactical advantage. Scouts were dispatched to map every hidden trail, narrow ravine, and secluded grove that might serve as an ambush point or a retreat route. The defenders discovered that the same natural features which had witnessed the brutality of past skirmishes could now be repurposed into strategic assets. Dense thickets and rocky outcrops offered cover for stealth maneuvers, while the meandering creek that cut through the property was earmarked as a natural barrier to slow any enemy advance. In this way, the homestead began to mirror a living organism, each element interdependent, each detail honed for both defense and, when necessary, calculated offense. Among the myriad preparations, one operation began to take shape that would prove pivotal in altering the balance of power. Gideon, Caleb, and Marisol, along with a hand-picked contingent of seasoned veterans and skilled newcomers alike, resolved to strike at the nerve center of Radcliffe's resupply chain. Their target was a fortified depot nestled in a secluded valley not far from the enemy's temporary encampment, a depot that, if crippled, would disrupt the flow of munitions and reinforcements to the syndicate's ranks. The mission was audacious in its scope, requiring a coordinated assault that would combine elements of stealth, explosive force, and rapid extraction. Over long hours spent in the dim light of the war room, the operation was dissected, refined, and planned to the last detail. Every contingency was considered, from the possibility of encountering unforeseen enemy patrols to the challenges of navigating treacherous terrain under cover of darkness. Preparations for the assault took on a frenetic rhythm as the chosen operatives, comprising experienced fighters like Jonas Reed and agile tacticians such as Elena Torres, along with several new recruits whose potential had been recognized by the leadership, underwent final briefings and equipment checks. The night before the planned attack, the homestead was shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by the hushed murmur of strategizing voices and the steady cadence of boots on earthen floors. In a quiet corner, away from the restless eyes of duty, Gideon took a moment to reflect on the journey that had led them to this precipice. He recalled the long nights of relentless vigilance, the sacrifices of comrades who had fallen in the line of duty, and the fragile hope that had sustained them through endless trials. Each memory added weight to his resolve, a solemn promise that the enemy would be met not with despair, but with an unyielding determination that echoed through every fiber of his being. As the dark hours of the coming night approached, the operatives assembled in silence, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Clad in tactical gear that blended seamlessly with the shadows, they moved out with the precision of a well-rehearsed unit, each step synchronized with the collective heartbeat of the homestead. Their route led them along a series of winding trails and hidden paths, carefully chosen to avoid the enemy's primary surveillance routes. The journey was arduous, marked by moments of intense concentration and silent prayers as they navigated the unpredictable terrain. Every rustle in the underbrush and every flicker of distant movement served as a reminder of the stakes at hand, a mission that carried not only the hope of disrupting the enemy's operations, but the weight of every life that depended on the success of their endeavor. Deep within the valley, the target depot loomed as a stark, concrete monolith amid the natural beauty of the rugged landscape. It was a structure that had been fortified over time, its walls reinforced with layers of metal and concrete, its perimeters guarded by a mix of automated defenses and watchful sentries. The intelligence gathered by Marisol had revealed that the depot's vulnerabilities lay not in its physical construction, but in the predictable patterns of its defenses and the routine schedules of its custodians. Armed with this knowledge, the infiltrators split into small cells. One cell was charged with disabling the external surveillance systems and neutralizing the perimeter guards, while another moved to plant explosive charges at key structural points. Jonas and Elena led a third cell, whose objective was to breach the inner sanctum of the depot and secure any intelligence that might be stored within, a final act of sabotage that would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate a rapid response. Under the cloak of darkness, the first phase of the assault began. The quiet murmur of the team's advance was punctuated by the soft click of devices being disabled and the muted thud of boots on gravel. Each movement was executed with the deliberate caution of those who knew that even the smallest misstep could trigger a cascade of unforeseen consequences. The tension was palpable, a living thing that coiled around every operative as they inched closer to the depot's outer defenses. In the moments leading up to the breach, time seemed to stretch into an eternity, a suspended heartbeat of anticipation that was shattered only when the first explosive charge was detonated. The controlled blast sent a shockwave of force into the structure, a brilliant flash of light and sound that marked the beginning of a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. As chaos erupted around the depot, the cells moved with swift precision. The sounds of breaking glass, crumbling concrete, and disoriented shouts mingled with the steady cadence of strategic orders transmitted over secure channels. In the ensuing pandemonium, the infiltrators secured their objectives with a mix of ruthless efficiency and measured restraint. The depot's defenses, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught, began to crumble as explosive charges detonated in rapid succession, each burst carefully timed to maximize structural damage while minimizing the risk of collateral harm. Amid the chaos, Jonas and Elena pressed forward, their determination driving them deeper into the enemy stronghold. Every step taken inside the depot was fraught with danger, yet each revelation, maps, encrypted files, and detailed records of enemy logistics, served as a tangible testament to the value of their mission. Outside, back at the homestead, the success of the operation was relayed through a series of terse, coded messages that sparked a renewed surge of morale among the defenders. Caleb and Marisol, monitoring the situation with unwavering focus, confirmed that the depot had been successfully crippled. The disruption in Radcliffe's supply chain was not merely a tactical victory, but a symbolic blow to the enemy's claim of invincibility. For every moment that the depot remained in ruins, the confidence of the syndicate's operatives wavered just a fraction more, a crack in the facade of their relentless might that the defenders vowed to widen in the coming days. With the target secured and critical intelligence in hand, the operatives executed a carefully timed extraction. They retraced their steps through the labyrinthine terrain, every movement synchronized as though conducted by an invisible maestro. The return journey was fraught with the same tension and vigilance as the initial assault, yet the knowledge of their success lent them a steady resolve. As dawn began to edge over the horizon, the infiltrators emerged from the valley, their faces etched with both relief and the sober realization of the cost of victory. The intelligence they carried, vivid details of enemy supply lines, logistical nodes, and strategic weak points, was delivered to the war room with an urgency that left little room for complacency. In the aftermath of the daring operation, the homestead's defenders mobilized to consolidate their gains and prepare for the next phase of the campaign. The once formidable enemy depot now lay in ruins, a stark monument to the effectiveness of coordinated resistance and the transformative power of precise intelligence. The success of the mission reverberated through the ranks, inspiring renewed determination in every heart. For Gideon Mercer and his comrades, the operation was a decisive step toward reclaiming their territory and reclaiming hope in a world that had known too much despair. Yet, as the celebrations were tempered by the harsh reality of ongoing conflict, the defenders understood that the battle was far from won. The syndicate, wounded but not defeated, would undoubtedly regroup and retaliate with a vengeance born of desperation and rage. With this understanding, the homestead's leadership began to draft new strategies, plans that would not only fortify their current positions but also anticipate future offensives with unyielding foresight. In quiet moments of reflection, amidst the logistical bustle and the whispered prayers for those lost in battle, a collective resolve emerged. They would continue to fight, adapt, and evolve, united by the belief that every sacrifice made was a stepping stone toward a future where the light of freedom could once again shine unimpeded across the rugged lands they called home. Thus, as the morning light fully broke through the darkness, casting long shadows over the scarred yet defiant landscape, the defenders of the homestead prepared to face the next chapter of their struggle. With intelligence secured, strategic victories achieved, and a spirit of resilience that burned as fiercely as ever, they stood ready to meet the enemy's inevitable return. Every plan drawn, every weapon readied, and every heart steeled for battle was a testament to the unyielding determination of those who refused to let tyranny extinguish their hope. In this ongoing war, every moment was a battleground, every decision a turning point, and in the face of overwhelming adversity, the defenders would continue to fight for the promise of a future forged in the crucible of courage and unity. As the sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky, the homestead's defenders emerged from the shadows of their temporary stronghold with a sense of cautious resolve. In the quiet moments after the depot's destruction, a heavy calm had settled over the compound, a lull that belied the fierce determination simmering beneath the surface. Gideon Mercer, his face etched with both fatigue and an unyielding steely determination, surveyed the land with a discerning eye. He recalled every detail of the previous night's daring assault, every explosive charge that had shattered enemy fortifications, and every silent step taken by his team through the valley's treacherous passages. The memory of that victory was a source of inspiration, yet it also served as a stark reminder that the syndicate's retaliatory fury would not be far behind. In the days that followed, the homestead buzzed with activity as the defenders shifted from immediate tactical recovery to long-term strategic planning. The compound's ancient stone walls, scarred by the recent conflicts, were reinforced with fresh layers of barbed wire, concrete, and salvaged metal. Each nail driven and every barricade erected symbolized the collective will to endure, a testament to the indomitable spirit that had carried them through countless trials. Men and women moved through the corridors with determined purpose, carrying supplies, tending to the wounded, and rearming with a renewed sense of urgency. The scars of battle were visible on both the landscape and the souls of those who had fought, yet these wounds also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which hope was kindled anew by every act of courage. Gideon spent long hours in the makeshift war room, a repurposed barn transformed into a hub of strategic command. The room was filled with maps, satellite images, and hastily scrawled notes detailing enemy positions and supply routes. Caleb and Marisol worked side by side with other trusted operatives, piecing together intelligence from intercepted communications, eyewitness accounts, and the subtle cues observed during the previous ambush. The new data painted a grim picture. The syndicate, although reeling from the loss of their depot, was already mobilizing forces to counterattack and reclaim its lost momentum. Rumors abounded of reinforcements arriving from distant regions, and whispers of a new, even more ruthless commander emerging within the ranks of the enemy stirred both fear and resolve among the defenders. In the cool haze of early afternoon, while the land around the homestead shimmered under the heat of the day, a small team led by Caleb ventured out on a reconnaissance mission. Their task was to track enemy movements and confirm the intelligence regarding the redeployment of the syndicate's forces. Moving silently along dusty trails and under the watchful gaze of weathered hills, the team pressed onward with the precision of trained scouts. Every step was measured and deliberate, every rustle of dry brush was scrutinized for signs of movement. In the sparse shade of ancient oak trees and among rocky outcrops, they discovered evidence that confirmed their suspicions: fresh tracks in the soft earth, hastily abandoned equipment, and the lingering smell of diesel told a story of rapid mobilization. This reconnaissance was not just a data-gathering mission, it was a reaffirmation of the enemy's intent to wage an all-out war, a grim harbinger of the battles yet to come. Back at the homestead, the mood was one of quiet intensity. Marisol, seated before a wall of monitors and keyboards, coordinated with distant Allied settlements, relaying the latest reconnaissance reports and urging local militias to ready themselves for the coming storm. Her fingers danced over the keyboard with the urgency of someone who understood that every moment counted. Despite her youth, her eyes held a wisdom far beyond her years, a clarity forged in the crucible of conflict. Her role was not only to gather intelligence but to interpret it, to see patterns and vulnerabilities in the enemy's approach that could be exploited in a decisive counteroffensive. The weight of her responsibility was enormous, yet she bore it with a quiet strength that inspired all who relied on her guidance. As the day progressed, Gideon held a council of war in the largest gathering room of the homestead. Around a long, rough-hewn table, key members of his command, veterans who had seen the brutal cost of conflict and new faces whose eyes gleamed with the promise of untapped potential, converged to deliberate on their next move. The discussion was measured and intense, each voice contributing tactical insights and cautionary notes. Ideas ranged from launching a preemptive strike to intercept a fresh enemy supply line to setting up fortified ambush points along likely routes of the syndicate's advance. Every plan was weighed for its risks and rewards, every detail scrutinized for potential failure. In this crucible of strategic thought, the defenders resolved that their next move must be as bold as it was precise, a calculated strike that would catch the enemy off guard and force them to divert their attention from regrouping and counterattacking. Even as the strategic planning continued indoors, the external landscape bore witness to subtle shifts that foretold the enemy's renewed aggression. A chill breeze swept over the plains at dusk, carrying with it the dust and echoes of distant convoys. The defenders, ever vigilant, watched as silhouettes of vehicles emerged on the horizon, hints of an enemy force returning with renewed vigor. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, every whispered conversation and every shared glance a silent acknowledgement that the battle was far from over. In the gathering gloom, the homestead's perimeter was meticulously patrolled by both seasoned dogs and alert sentries, each tasked with spotting any sign of enemy movement. Nightfall brought with it a sense of impending confrontation. Under the cloak of darkness, the homestead was transformed into a labyrinth of shadow and light, where every corner and crevice was both sanctuary and potential battleground. Gideon, dressed in his worn tactical gear, moved along the outer defenses, his silhouette a lone figure against the vast, star-studded sky. The cool night air was punctuated by the distant hum of approaching vehicles and the soft murmur of strategic communications over secure radios. The enemy, it seemed, had chosen the veil of night to launch their next phase, a calculated maneuver intended to exploit any lapse in vigilance. In a secluded outbuilding repurposed as a command post, Caleb and a select group of operatives huddled around a portable radio, their eyes fixed on a crackling map that updated in real time. The latest reports indicated that enemy convoys were converging on a narrow pass on the eastern flank, a bottleneck that could be turned into a trap if the defenders acted quickly. With deliberate precision, Caleb outlined a plan, a coordinated ambush that would leverage the natural terrain to their advantage, disrupt the enemy's advance, and inflict heavy casualties on the incoming force. The plan was audacious, requiring perfect timing and unerring execution, but the evidence of the enemy's vulnerability was compelling. Marisol's voice cut through the static of the radio transmission, her tone calm and resolute as she confirmed the enemy's position and estimated the size of the force. Her updates were methodical, providing every detail necessary for the operation to succeed. With her guidance, a team of highly skilled marksmen and guerrilla fighters, each chosen for their expertise in navigating the rugged terrain, prepared to move into position. The plan was to lie in wait until the enemy's convoys were fully committed to the narrow pass, then unleash a barrage of precision fire and explosive charges that would render the route impassable and sow chaos among the enemy ranks. As midnight approached, the ambush teams, armed with suppressed weapons and dark camouflage, melted into the natural contours of the land. Every rustle of dry grass, every whisper of the wind against ancient boulders, heightened the tension as the enemy's approach became imminent. The defenders' movements were almost imperceptible, a silent ballet of shadow and light choreographed over months of meticulous planning. Each operative was hyper-aware of the stakes. The success of this ambush could tilt the balance in their favor, while any miscalculation could spell disaster for the homestead. In the moments before the enemy's arrival, the landscape itself seemed to hold its breath. The cool, still night was broken only by the measured, rhythmic breathing of the defenders and the distant, ominous drone of approaching engines. Gideon, positioned at a commanding overlook, peered through the binoculars at the advancing silhouettes, his heart pounding in time with the slow, deliberate beat of the coming conflict. His mind raced through every contingency he had prepared for. Every potential pitfall that could derail their carefully orchestrated plan. In that suspended moment, the future hung in a delicate balance, a precarious state of suspended animation before the inevitable eruption of violence. Then, as if on cue, the enemy convoy entered the kill zone. The narrow pass, lined with jagged rocks and dense clusters of trees, became the stage for a dramatic confrontation. With a series of prearranged signals, the ambush was triggered. Explosive charges hidden beneath rocks detonated with a concussive blast, sending shockwaves through the enemy formation. Simultaneously, the marksmen opened fire, their bullets slicing through the darkness with deadly precision. Chaos erupted among the enemy ranks as vehicles skidded off the road and soldiers scrambled for cover. The night was filled with the sounds of shattering metal, anguished shouts, and the relentless cadence of gunfire, a cacophony that bore witness to the ferocity of the ambush. In the ensuing melee, the defenders moved with calculated efficiency. Each operative knew their role with an almost instinctual certainty. Every shot fired, every movement executed, was part of a larger symphony of coordinated resistance. The enemy, caught off guard by the ferocity and precision of the attack, found themselves disoriented and in disarray. The ambush had achieved its purpose, creating a breach in the enemy's formation that allowed the defenders to press their advantage. Amid the swirling dust and smoke, Gideon's gaze remained fixed on the unfolding battle, his mind already formulating plans for the next phase of their counteroffensive. As the ambush unfolded over what felt like an eternity compressed into mere minutes, the defenders capitalized on their tactical success. Isolated pockets of enemy forces were systematically neutralized as the defenders advanced through the chaos. The narrow pass, once the artery of enemy reinforcements, was now a maelstrom of shattered ambitions and broken formations. Caleb's operatives secured key vantage points along the pass's perimeter, preventing any organized retreat or regrouping by the enemy. Meanwhile, Marisol's team continued to relay real-time intelligence to the war room, ensuring that every shift in the battle was met with an immediate, calculated response. By the time the first hints of dawn began to break over the horizon, the ambush had achieved a decisive victory. The enemy convoy was in ruins, vehicles smoldered amidst crumpled metal, and scattered remnants of a once formidable force lay disoriented and defeated. The cost had been high on both sides, yet the defenders had managed to turn the tide of the engagement in their favor. In the quiet aftermath, as the embers of the explosion cooled and the mist of gunpowder slowly lifted, the homestead's warriors gathered to assess their hard-won victory. Their faces, illuminated by the soft light of dawn, bore the marks of fatigue and determination, but also a quiet satisfaction born of successful defiance. In the debriefing that followed within the fortified walls of the command center, Gideon listened intently as Caleb, Marisol, and other key operatives recounted the ambush in painstaking detail. Every observation was catalogued, the enemy's positions, the timing of their movements, and even the unexpected variables that had emerged during the engagement. This information, though gathered at great personal risk, was invaluable. It would not only inform the immediate next steps but would also serve as a critical reference for future operations aimed at dismantling the syndicate's grip on the region. As the sun ascended higher, casting long, determined shadows over the homestead, the defenders began the process of consolidating their victory, rearming their forces, and preparing for the inevitable counterattacks that would follow. The ambush had demonstrated that the enemy was not invincible, and that with unity, precise planning, and unwavering resolve, even the most formidable adversaries could be overcome. Yet, as the day wore on and the initial euphoria of victory gave way to sober reflection, it was clear that this was only one battle in a long, arduous war. The syndicate would undoubtedly regroup, adapt, and launch retaliatory strikes. The homestead's defenders knew that their fight was far from over, and that every victory was but a brief respite in a seemingly endless cycle of conflict. In the days to come, as the homestead's inhabitants resumed their daily routines amid the constant preparations for further hostilities, a renewed sense of purpose permeated every corner of their beleaguered refuge. The memory of the ambush, with its dramatic flashes of valor and sacrifice, served as a rallying cry, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, the light of human determination could blaze forth and defy the oppressive forces that sought to subdue them. With Gideon Mercer at the helm, the defenders of the homestead steeled themselves for the challenges ahead, knowing that every action, every carefully calculated maneuver, was a step toward reclaiming their land, their freedom, and the promise of a future unshadowed by tyranny. And so, as the homestead prepared to face the next chapter of its relentless struggle, the legacy of its defenders continued to grow, etched into the rugged terrain, whispered by the winds, and carried forward by the unyielding spirit of those who dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow. In the restless hours following the ambush's resounding victory, the homestead's defenders found themselves suspended in a fragile equilibrium, a momentary interlude in the endless cadence of conflict that had defined their existence. As the warm glow of a hesitant dawn gave way to a brisk, determined day, Gideon Mercer moved through the compound with the quiet gravity of a man who bore both the weight of innumerable battles and the fragile hope of a better future. The echoes of the previous night's triumph still reverberated through the reinforced walls and scarred earth, yet a palpable tension lingered in every whispered conversation, every furtive glance exchanged among the ranks. The remnants of the enemy, scattered like broken fragments across the narrow pass, had only confirmed what the defenders had long suspected: the syndicate was a persistent and evolving menace. Intelligence gathered by Marisol's tireless team revealed that, even in the wake of their recent setback, Radcliffe's command had begun to consolidate its forces once again. Reports arrived in a steady stream, encrypted messages from Allied outposts, clandestine dispatches intercepted from enemy channels, and observations from roving scouts, that painted a picture of an adversary meticulously planning its next strike. The new data hinted at an impending offensive designed to recapture lost ground and to shatter the defenders' resolve by exploiting any perceived vulnerability in their rapidly reinforced positions. In the command center, now a renovated wing of the homestead where old stone met modern surveillance technology, Caleb pored over maps and satellite imagery. Every line and contour on the digital screen was scrutinized for signs of enemy regrouping. His experienced eyes, once hardened by years in the field, now flickered with a mixture of caution and unwavering determination. With steady fingers, he recalibrated the positions of defensive emplacements and charted potential escape routes for rapid countermovements. The data, meticulously gathered by Marisol and cross-referenced with field reports, indicated that the enemy's forces were not only amassing in isolated pockets but were also experimenting with new tactical formations, shifts designed to mask their true numbers and intentions. This revelation set off a flurry of activity as the defenders adjusted their battle plans to account for these strategic modifications. Outside the fortified perimeter, the landscape itself seemed to be an active participant in the unfolding drama. The once familiar rolling fields and rugged hills now appeared as both a sanctuary and a challenge, a natural maze that could either shield the defenders or expose them to the enemy's ambush. Under the keen guidance of experienced scouts, small teams were dispatched to remap the terrain, noting every subtle change wrought by nature or by the scars of recent conflict. Their observations were recorded with painstaking accuracy. For every hidden vale or treacherous ridge might become the setting for the next pivotal confrontation. The interplay of sunlight and shadow across the land was now a silent counterpoint to the strategic maneuvers being plotted indoors, a constant reminder that the very earth was as much a battlefield as any constructed fortification. Gideon's own moments of solitude were spent traversing the perimeter on long, reflective walks. With each measured step along the boundary, he contemplated the relentless cycle of defense and counterattack that had become his life. The memories of comrades lost and victories hard-won mingled in his mind with a sense of urgency, a determination to protect not only the physical confines of the homestead but the very ideals of freedom and resilience that it symbolized. In these quiet interludes, he recalled the faces of those who had stood by his side, drawing strength from the silent camaraderie that had bound them through countless trials. Their shared sacrifices had forged a bond that transcended the chaos of battle, a bond that now fueled his resolve to outlast the enemy's persistent onslaught. Within the war room, preparations for the next operation took on an almost sacred intensity. Marisol, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she relayed real-time intelligence updates, coordinated a series of simulated drills designed to sharpen every operative's reflexes and strategic acumen. Her calm, analytical demeanor masked an inner tempest of determination. Each new piece of data was a clarion call to action. With her guidance, the defenders reconfigured their communications network, ensuring that even in the midst of enemy jamming attempts or unforeseen disruptions, their chain of command would remain unbroken. Every operative, from the veteran fighters like Jonas Reed to the newest recruits whose eyes shone with untapped potential, was immersed in the urgent rhythm of rehearsed maneuvers and contingency planning. At the heart of this flurry of activity, a pivotal decision was reached, to launch a preemptive counteroffensive aimed at disrupting the enemy's nascent mobilization. The plan was audacious, a series of coordinated strikes deep within the enemy's staging areas, targeting critical supply depots and command outposts that had begun to reassemble in the shadow of distant hills. Caleb outlined the operation with a measured calm that belied the gravity of the task. The strategy hinged on speed and the element of surprise, to hit the enemy hard before they could complete their regrouping. Every detail was scrutinized: the best times for launch, the precise coordinates of vulnerable targets, the escape routes to be secured in advance, and even the weather patterns that might favor their covert movements. The plan was intricate, a delicate tapestry woven from both technological intelligence and the primal instincts honed in the fires of previous battles. In preparation for the counteroffensive, teams were split into specialized units, each tasked with a specific objective that, when combined, would form a devastating blow to the enemy's resurgence. One unit, led by Jonas Reed and Elena Torres, was charged with infiltrating a newly established forward command post that served as a hub for coordinating enemy operations. Their mission was to gather further intelligence and, if possible, sabotage communications to sow confusion in the enemy's ranks. Simultaneously, another contingent prepared to target a series of supply caches that had been identified as vital to the enemy's logistical chain. These supply points, tucked away in the recesses of an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of enemy territory, were to be neutralized with precision strikes that would cripple the enemy's ability to sustain their renewed offensive. Under the cloak of an overcast afternoon, as thick clouds gathered above the rugged horizon, the counteroffensive was set into motion. The selected teams moved out in tight, silent formations, their progress marked by the rustle of dry leaves and the soft padding of boots against uneven terrain. Every operative was aware that the success of their mission depended on absolute coordination and the suppression of any detectable noise. The natural world, which had borne witness to so many battles, now provided both cover and peril, a duality that demanded every ounce of focus and resolve. The first unit advanced toward the enemy command post, their movements choreographed in an intricate dance of stealth and precision. The air was thick with anticipation as they bypassed isolated patrols and circled the perimeter of their target, all the while gathering vital intelligence and awaiting the decisive moment to strike. Meanwhile, the team assigned to the supply caches approached their objective with a similar blend of caution and determination. The industrial complex, long abandoned and reclaimed by nature, now served as a makeshift depot for enemy munitions and fuel. Its rusted structures and dark, cavernous interiors were a silent testament to the rapid transformation wrought by war. The operatives infiltrated the compound with a practiced ease, each step measured and each movement cloaked in the promise of retribution. In the depths of the complex, they located the storage facilities, halls lined with crates, barrels, and vehicles bristling with the enemy's weapons of war. With the calm efficiency that had become their trademark, they set explosive charges at critical points, intent on reducing the enemy's ability to mobilize further reinforcements. As the hours wore on, the tension across the homestead and on the battlefield reached a fever pitch. The counteroffensive unfolded as a series of interlocking actions, each executed with the precision of a finely tuned instrument. The isolated sabotage of the command post was reported back through encrypted channels, sending a wave of cautious triumph through the war room. The disruption in enemy communications, though brief, was enough to create pockets of disarray among their ranks, a small but significant crack in the facade of their renewed vigor. In the industrial complex, the explosive charges were detonated in rapid succession, their concussive blasts shattering the eerie silence and reducing vital infrastructure to smoldering ruins. The coordinated strikes, though executed under immense pressure, affirmed the defenders' belief that every measured act of defiance could alter the course of an interminable war. In the aftermath of these simultaneous operations, as dusk settled over a landscape scarred by the ravages of battle, the homestead's defenders reconvened to assess the outcomes. In the makeshift debriefing held beneath a weathered canopy in the central courtyard, Caleb, Marisol, and the other commanders listened intently to the reports streaming in from the field. The enemy command post lay in a state of disarray, communications were down, and the once cohesive lines of command had fractured into isolated, disorganized units. The supply caches, too, had been reduced to rubble and smoldering embers, a testament to the effectiveness of the preemptive strikes. Yet even as these victories were noted with tempered satisfaction, a sober understanding prevailed. The syndicate's will to fight remained unbroken, and every action would only serve to escalate the cycle of retribution. Gideon stood apart from the debriefing, his gaze drifting across the faces of those who had risked everything in the pursuit of freedom. In their eyes shone both the weariness of endless conflict and the unwavering determination to continue the struggle, each scar, each bruise, a silent chronicle of their commitment to a cause greater than themselves. The counteroffensive had delivered a significant blow to the enemy's burgeoning strength, yet it also underscored the precarious nature of their situation. The syndicate, though momentarily disoriented, would undoubtedly regroup and return with renewed fervor. The victory, like so many before it, was but a fleeting respite, a momentary reprieve in an unending war. As the evening deepened into a reflective night, the homestead settled into a cautious lull. The defenders, gathering around dimly lit fires and meager meals, exchanged quiet words of resolve and solemn promises for the days ahead. Marisol's updates continued to filter in through secure channels, each message a reminder that the enemy was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. And yet, in that shared moment of stillness, the collective spirit of the homestead shone brighter than ever, a beacon of unity and defiance amid a turbulent world. In the lingering twilight, as the first stars emerged to punctuate the vast expanse of the sky, Gideon Mercer allowed himself a rare moment of introspection. His thoughts drifted over the sacrifices of the past and the uncertain promise of the future, and he resolved that every setback, every loss, would only serve to galvanize their cause. The counteroffensive had rekindled a fragile flame of hope, a promise that, regardless of the enemy's relentless pursuit, the defenders of the homestead would continue to fight, adapt, and endure. Thus, as night fully claimed the land once more, the defenders prepared themselves for the inevitable trials that lay ahead. Their hearts, though battered by the ceaseless toll of conflict, beat with a quiet, unyielding rhythm of defiance. In that solemn darkness, every whispered vow and every determined glance was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a promise that the legacy of their struggle would not be forgotten, and that freedom, however elusive, was worth every sacrifice. In the deepening shadow of an encroaching storm, the homestead's defenders found themselves teetering on the brink of a new and even more perilous phase of the conflict. The recent counteroffensive had dealt a serious blow to the syndicate's logistics and command structure, yet every victory was tempered by the harsh realization that the enemy's relentless ambition was far from extinguished. As dusk gave way to night, the land was awash in a surreal interplay of light and dark, a twilight where hope and despair mingled like old acquaintances. The sky, heavy with the promise of rain, seemed to mirror the turmoil of hearts hardened by battle and tempered by sacrifice. Gideon Mercer stood upon a weathered outcropping overlooking the vast expanse of his beleaguered domain. His eyes, dark and unyielding, traced the jagged silhouette of distant hills and the long, twisting corridors of the valley below, a region now transformed into a crucible for warfare. Every ridge and crevice held memories of past skirmishes, each scar on the land a testament to the fierce struggle between those who yearned for freedom and those who sought to impose tyranny. In that solemn moment, Gideon's thoughts wandered through the litany of sacrifices that had paved the way for the present, and he silently vowed that every drop of blood spilled would be honored with a steadfast refusal to surrender. Within the fortified walls of the homestead, the atmosphere was electric with the intensity of anticipation and strategic fervor. Caleb, whose calm precision had become a bedrock for the command center, reassembled his team for another round of detailed briefings. Maps, littered with new tactical annotations and encircled by fresh streams of digital intelligence from Marisol's ever-vigilant network, were spread across a long, scarred table. Each marker represented not only a target or a danger zone but a piece in the larger puzzle that was the enemy's evolving strategy. Marisol herself, with her gaze fixed on a bank of monitors, relayed updates in a measured cadence. Her voice, steady and imbued with the weight of responsibility, detailed the enemy's latest movements, a swift, coordinated mobilization observed at the perimeter of a dense forest region, where reinforcements were rumored to be gathering under the command of a newly identified syndicate lieutenant. The revelation set off a flurry of activity within the command center. Operatives recalibrated their positions and altered contingency plans on the fly, aware that the enemy's regrouping could herald a new, more devastating assault. Tension coiled in the air as every operative knew that the slightest lapse in vigilance could open a chasm for the enemy to exploit. The command center, with its low hum of electronic communication and the soft clatter of keys, served as the nerve center of their resistance, a place where each heartbeat was synchronized with the pulse of the land and every decision was a matter of life and death. Outside, under a sky darkened by swirling clouds and the intermittent flash of distant lightning, the natural world offered both refuge and hazard. The rugged terrain, an intricate tapestry of deep ravines, rocky outcrops, and overgrown paths, was now both ally and adversary. Scouts, whose lives had been honed by countless encounters with nature's indifference, were dispatched to survey the enemy's movements across this unpredictable landscape. Their reports, transmitted in hushed tones over secure channels, painted a picture of an adversary adapting to the terrain with ruthless efficiency. The enemy's reinforcements were making their way toward a critical juncture, a narrow mountain pass that had long served as the only viable route through the otherwise impassable foothills. This pass, a natural choke point, was of paramount strategic importance. Its control could either guarantee the flow of supplies and reinforcements or, if disrupted, could strangle the enemy's advance. In response, Gideon and his senior commanders convened once more in the war room, their faces set in grim determination. The plan that emerged from the charged discussions was as audacious as it was necessary, a preemptive ambush at the mountain pass that would serve to cripple the enemy's resupply line and send a message of defiance that reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield. The operation was to be executed under the cover of the coming storm, a natural shroud that would obscure movements and amplify the element of surprise. Teams were to be split into specialized units, each tasked with different objectives that, when combined, would create a multi-pronged assault. One unit, led by Jonas Reed and bolstered by seasoned veterans, would set up hidden observation posts along the pass to monitor enemy progress and relay real-time updates. Another contingent, comprised of stealthy operatives skilled in demolitions and close-quarters combat, was charged with the silent placement of explosive devices along key choke points. Yet another team was tasked with securing the high ground along the edges of the pass, ensuring that no enemy reinforcements could bypass their lines undetected. As preparations commenced, every detail was scrutinized with the rigor of a life-or-death calculus. The operatives moved like specters through the labyrinthine landscape, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and their movements synchronized with an almost preternatural understanding. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of rain, a promise that nature itself might soon join the battle, its fury echoing the defiant hearts of those who fought to preserve their freedom. In the interim hours before the assault, the homestead was abuzz with whispered farewells, quiet prayers, and the resolute murmurs of vows that transcended fear. In one such hushed moment, Marisol looked out over the compound from the relative safety of the command center. Her eyes, reflecting both sorrow and fierce determination, mirrored the deep, unyielding resolve that had been etched into every fiber of her being through years of hardship. With her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the communication console, she transmitted one final, coded message, a signal that the time for decisive action was imminent. The storm broke with a fury that seemed to shake the very earth, rain pelting the rugged landscape like a barrage of tiny bullets. Under this tumultuous canopy, the ambush teams deployed with meticulous precision. The first phase of the operation unfolded as planned. Operatives moved silently into position along the ridge overlooking the narrow pass, their forms cloaked by the swirling mists and the heavy downpour. In the obscuring darkness, every movement was a silent testament to the countless hours of preparation, every breath a measured exhalation of resolve. The natural cover afforded by the storm and the rugged terrain worked in their favor, shrouding their approach as the enemy's attention was drawn to the chaotic dance of raindrops and lightning across the sky. At the designated moment, the ambush was triggered with the calculated ferocity of a well-rehearsed symphony of destruction. Explosive charges, planted earlier in concealed recesses along the pass, detonated in rapid succession. The resulting blasts echoed off the sheer walls of the valley, sending shockwaves through the enemy's formation and shattering the oppressive silence of the stormy night. The enemy, caught off guard by the sudden, violent disruption, scrambled to reorganize their forces. In the ensuing chaos, the marksmen from the high ground unit opened fire with ruthless precision, their shots piercing the cacophony of the storm like bolts of lightning. Each burst of gunfire was a punctuation in the unfolding drama, a stark declaration that the homestead's defenders would not relent in their struggle. Amid the melee, Jonas Reed led his team through the dense cover, moving like shadows among the trees as they pressed the attack. The enemy's reinforcements, still reeling from the initial shock, found themselves trapped in a maelstrom of calculated violence. Explosions and the staccato rhythm of rifle fire melded into a terrifying symphony of war. In the thick of the battle, individual acts of heroism unfolded in rapid succession. A young operative, barely out of his teens, fought with a determination that belied his inexperience. An older soldier, his face lined with the scars of previous conflicts, provided cover fire that allowed his comrades to advance undetected. Each life, each sacrifice, was woven into the fabric of that moment, a living tapestry of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Back at the command center, Caleb and Marisol monitored the unfolding operation with bated breath. Their screens flickered with live feeds from hidden cameras and the steady stream of coded updates that poured in from the field. Every data point was a lifeline, a crucial indicator of both success and potential setback. Marisol's steady voice, barely audible over the crackle of the communication lines, reported that the enemy's formation was disintegrating. The strategic placement of explosive charges had not only halted their advance but had forced them into a disorganized retreat, their lines fracturing under the combined pressure of the ambush and the relentless barrage of gunfire. As the storm raged on, the battle at the mountain pass reached a crescendo. The enemy, realizing that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing, attempted a desperate regrouping. In response, the defenders pressed their advantage with an intensity born of years of hard-fought survival. The high ground teams moved to seal off any escape routes, while the demolition squads executed secondary charges to further destabilize the enemy's position. The ferocity of the counteroffensive was matched only by the determination etched onto the faces of those who fought, a testament to the unyielding spirit that refused to bow in the face of tyranny. In the aftermath of the ambush, as the rain began to subside and the storm's fury gave way to a haunting, eerie calm, the battlefield was left strewn with the shattered remnants of the enemy's ambitions. Vehicles lay overturned and ablaze, and scattered groups of enemy soldiers huddled in disarray amidst the wreckage. The narrow pass, once the artery of enemy advance, now served as a grim monument to the defenders' resolute strike. Amid the ruin and silence, the ambush teams regrouped, their breaths mingling with the mist that clung to the shattered landscape. Every operative, from the seasoned veterans to the newest recruits, bore the marks of the night's ferocity, bruises, scars, and an unspoken resolve that each sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of a future free from oppression. Back at the homestead, as the first rays of dawn began to break through the dissipating storm clouds, Gideon Mercer and his inner circle convened in the war room once again. The air was heavy with both the weight of the recent victory and the sober awareness that the enemy would soon regroup for a counterattack. Caleb detailed the tactical outcomes of the ambush, while Marisol provided a comprehensive analysis of enemy movements gleaned from the scattered reports. The data confirmed that the preemptive strike had not only delayed the syndicate's advance but had also significantly disrupted their operational coherence. Yet, even as a moment of triumphant relief washed over the defenders, there was no time to linger. The syndicate's resolve was unyielding, and every victory, however significant, was but a fleeting pause in the relentless cycle of conflict. In the quiet that followed, as the homestead slowly stirred back to life, each member of the resistance silently rededicated themselves to the cause. The ambush at the mountain pass had proven that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, precision, unity, and unyielding courage could forge a path toward freedom. Gideon's voice, low and resolute, issued orders for the next phase of operations, a series of coordinated strikes aimed at dismantling the enemy's remaining strongholds and cutting off their access to critical supply lines. Every detail was planned with painstaking care, every contingency weighed against the potential cost. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing the scarred landscape in a tentative light, the defenders of the homestead prepared to write the next chapter in their unending struggle, a chapter that would demand further sacrifices, unyielding determination, and a belief that no force of darkness could ultimately extinguish the enduring light of hope. In the aftermath of the decisive ambush at the mountain pass, a heavy silence settled over the scarred landscape, a silence that spoke of both victory and the foreboding weight of what was yet to come. As the defenders of the homestead gathered in the cool light of a new day, the embers of past conflicts and the promise of future battles intertwined in a tapestry of solemn reflection and steely resolve. Gideon Mercer, his eyes bearing the depth of a man who had seen too much war and too many sacrifices, surveyed his domain with a measured calm. The rugged hills, the weathered stone walls of the homestead, and even the remnants of shattered enemy formations had become enduring symbols of resistance against a relentless adversary. In that quiet moment, he recalled the countless nights spent in the war room, the whispered strategies, the moments of triumph, and the unbearable losses, a litany that had forged the unbreakable bond among his people. The victory at the mountain pass, though hard-won and bittersweet, had irrevocably shifted the balance in the region. Caleb, Marisol, Jonas, Elena, and the rest of the inner circle reconvened in the newly fortified operations center, a converted wing of the homestead where the old met the new in a seamless blend of tactical acumen and modern technology. Detailed maps, replete with the scars of past engagements and marked with fresh intelligence, were spread out on long wooden tables. Here, every line and every annotation was a testament to a shared struggle and a meticulously crafted plan to drive the enemy further back. Marisol's updates, transmitted through a secure network of encrypted channels, continued to stream in from Allied outposts and scouts across the terrain, each piece of information reinforcing the urgent need for further action. The counteroffensive had not been a single moment of glory but a continuum of coordinated strikes, each one a calculated effort to dismantle the syndicate's infrastructure and to disrupt their supply lines permanently. In the wake of the ambush, the enemy's ranks had splintered into disorganized clusters, their command structure shattered like the remnants of a once formidable fortress. Yet the syndicate's resolve, though battered, still smoldered beneath the surface, a reminder that every victory demanded vigilance, for the enemy would not easily yield. It was this tension, this perpetual state of readiness, that now defined life at the homestead. Outside, the natural world played its own part in the unfolding saga. The wind swept across open plains and through the alleys of ancient orchards, carrying with it the scent of rain and the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, a silent promise that nature itself was an ally in this relentless battle. Scouts, whose faces were painted with both determination and the dust of the rugged trails they had traversed, continued to chart every subtle shift in the enemy's formations. Their reports, punctuated by the occasional cry of a distant hawk or the rustle of leaves, provided the intelligence that Caleb used to refine their defensive and offensive strategies. Every hill and valley, every river bend and rocky outcrop, was now imbued with a tactical significance that would shape the future course of the conflict. The homestead, once a quiet refuge from a chaotic world, had transformed into a living, breathing citadel of resistance. Men and women moved about with a singular purpose, to ensure that the legacy of their forebears, the promise of freedom, would endure. In the makeshift infirmary set up in one of the larger barns, injured soldiers were tended to with both medical expertise and compassionate care. Their wounds, both physical and emotional, were healed slowly, each recovery a quiet tribute to the unyielding spirit that bound the defenders together. Even as the scars of battle were visible in the faded lines of their faces and the weariness in their eyes, there shone a light of unwavering determination, a fire that no enemy could ever hope to extinguish. Gideon's mind, ever burdened with the weight of responsibility, turned to the future as he walked the perimeter at dusk. Every step along the fortified boundary was a reminder of the sacrifices made and the sacrifices yet to come. He recalled the sacrifices of comrades lost, friends who had given their lives in moments of desperate valor, and he vowed that their memories would serve as a rallying cry for those who remained. With each measured stride, he envisioned a future where the enemy's grip would be broken entirely, where the land would once again be free from the shadow of tyranny, and where the hearts of his people would beat unburdened by fear. Inside the war room, a renewed strategy was taking shape. Caleb, ever the analytical mind, reviewed the latest reconnaissance reports and enemy movements. The data confirmed that the syndicate was scrambling to reassemble its forces, attempting to muster a counterattack that would reclaim lost ground and reassert their dominion. But the defenders, now armed with invaluable intelligence and buoyed by recent victories, were more determined than ever. A comprehensive plan was formulated, a multi-pronged offensive designed to target key enemy strongholds, disrupt their lines of communication, and dismantle their logistical network piece by piece. This plan, forged in the crucible of relentless conflict and tempered by the lessons of every previous battle, was as bold as it was precise. It called for synchronized strikes by specialized teams, rapid maneuvers through treacherous terrain, and the unyielding coordination of every available resource. Marisol, her eyes alight with the spark of youthful resolve and hardened by the trials of war, was assigned the critical role of coordinating the overall intelligence network. Her ability to sift through the torrents of intercepted communications and transform them into actionable insights had become a lifeline for the resistance. In a room filled with the hum of computer monitors and the soft clatter of keys, she mapped the enemy's network with astonishing clarity, identifying the nerve centers that could, if neutralized, cripple the syndicate's ability to wage war. Her work was meticulous, every data point a potential turning point in the impending offensive. The night before the planned counteroffensive was a study in quiet intensity. In the stillness of the homestead's inner sanctum, operatives prepared for what they knew would be a defining moment in their struggle. Briefing sessions were held in hushed tones, final checks of weapons, communications, and navigation equipment were performed with the precision of a well-oiled machine. In these moments, every heartbeat, every whispered word of encouragement, was a pledge to defend not just a piece of land, but an entire way of life, a life where freedom, dignity, and hope were not the spoils of the powerful, but the inalienable rights of every soul. At the break of a stormy pre-dawn, the counteroffensive was launched. Under the cover of a dense, rolling fog and the relentless patter of rain, specialized teams advanced like phantoms through the enemy's rear lines. Jonas Reed and Elena Torres led one such unit. Moving with an almost imperceptible silence across wet, slick ground as they approached a heavily guarded enemy communications hub. Their objective was clear: infiltrate the stronghold, disable its core systems, and sow the seeds of disarray among the enemy's command structure. In another sector, a unit led by seasoned veterans targeted a series of critical supply depots nestled in an abandoned industrial complex. Explosive charges were set with careful deliberation, each one timed to coincide with the others, ensuring that when detonated, the resulting explosions would ripple outward, disrupting the enemy's supply chain in one cataclysmic blow. The chaos that ensued was both swift and merciless. Explosions echoed off crumbling concrete walls, the brilliant flashes of incendiary blasts illuminated the dark sky, momentarily revealing the enemy's panicked movements. Amid the confusion, the defenders struck with precision, their actions a blur of disciplined chaos as they exploited every weakness uncovered by their earlier reconnaissance. The enemy's attempts to regroup were thwarted at every turn by the relentless, coordinated strikes of the counteroffensive. In the communications hub, Jonas and Elena's team disabled the nerve center of the enemy's operations, leaving their adversaries scrambling to restore order amid the wreckage. In the industrial complex, the destruction of supply caches sent shockwaves through the syndicate's ranks, each explosion a resounding declaration that their hold on the region was crumbling. Back at the homestead, the sounds of battle were interwoven with the steady pulse of resolute determination. In the war room, Caleb and Marisol monitored the unfolding operations with unwavering focus. Every update was a reminder of both the cost of freedom and the promise of a new dawn. The enemy's lines were fracturing, their once cohesive formations disintegrating under the relentless assault of coordinated strikes. Yet, even as victory seemed within reach, there was a sober awareness that the road ahead would be paved with further trials and sacrifices. As the counteroffensive reached its zenith, Gideon Mercer stood once more atop the highest point of his domain, his eyes scanning the horizon for the glimmer of hope that would signal lasting change. The rugged terrain, scarred by the conflict and lit by the emerging light of day, bore witness to the indomitable spirit of a people who refused to be subdued. In that silent vigil, the weight of every sacrifice and every victory coalesced into a single, unyielding truth: the battle for freedom was not defined by a single moment of triumph, but by an endless commitment to resilience in the face of relentless adversity. With the enemy's supply lines in tatters and their command structure in disarray, the syndicate's capacity for organized resistance had been dealt a crippling blow. The counteroffensive, though hard-fought and marred by loss, had rekindled a flame of hope that now burned brighter than ever in the hearts of the homestead's defenders. In the ensuing days, as enemy forces retreated into the shadows and regrouped in desperate attempts to reclaim their lost power, the resistance set about consolidating their hard-won gains. New defensive perimeters were established, critical communication lines reinforced, and every vulnerable point on the frontier was methodically secured. The victory was not the end of the struggle, but a vital turning point, a beacon that illuminated the path toward a future where tyranny could be finally and irrevocably overthrown. In the quiet aftermath of the counteroffensive, as the first true light of day broke over the horizon, the homestead and its people gathered in silent tribute to those who had fallen and in fervent celebration of the hope that now pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the scarred earth. Amid the soft murmur of renewed life and the gentle rustle of wind through newly fortified walls, Gideon Mercer and his comrades shared a collective understanding that their struggle, forged in the crucible of relentless conflict, was a testament to the unyielding resilience of the human spirit. And as they prepared to meet whatever new challenges the future might hold, they did so with the conviction that the legacy of their resistance, etched into every stone, every scar, and every whispered vow, would endure long after the guns fell silent. Thus, in the final echoes of that fateful day, the defenders of the homestead embraced the promise of tomorrow, a tomorrow built not on the fleeting victories of war, but on the everlasting hope of freedom and the enduring power of unity. With hearts fortified by sacrifice and eyes set upon the distant horizon, they marched onward into a future that, though uncertain and hard-won, shone with the bright promise of a new dawn.